Welcome to Mysterious Goings On. I thought it might be a little fun for you to listen to a short story of mine from my most recent collection, Pilate 7, which is a book of short stories that revolve around the world of my John Pilate Mysteries series. So I've already recorded an intro and the entire thing, so I'm just going to put that in here, and I hope you'll enjoy it. Even if you don't know anything about the John Pilate universe, I think you might enjoy this story. It's called Badge. Until next time, keep reading. Welcome to a reading from Pilate 7, a book of short stories in the John Pilate series. I'm your host, Alex Greenwood, also known as J. Alexander Greenwood, the author of the series. Pilate 7 is a departure from other books in the series, which started with Pilate's Cross, went to Pilate's Key, to Pilate's Ghost, to Pilate's Blood. And now with Pilate 7, instead of a full-length novel, we have a book of 7 short stories that focus on characters around our lead character, around our hero, if you will, John Pilate. And today's reading is going to be from a short story called Badge. If you're familiar with the series, there should be a lot of things here that make sense to you. If you're not, hopefully it will entice you to pick up Pilate's Cross where this one leaves off and enjoy that. And before I let you go and start the story, just a reminder, you can find my blog, more information about the series. You can purchase autographed copies of the paperbacks. You can also buy other kind of merchandise at pilatescross.com, which is pilatescross.com. And then if you just want an ebook or just get a book elsewhere, you can find the ebooks and the books and even an audiobook on Amazon, and then also, of course, Barnes & Noble. Just about wherever ebooks and books are sold online, you can find my books. So without further ado, and if you'll bear with me through my attempts at accents, we will read Badge from Pilate 7. Copyright 2015, J. Alexander Greenwood, Caroline Street Press. Ollie Ollison's thick fingers grasped the bottle of wild turkey as if it were the size of a beer can, pouring a shot for himself and another for Morgan Scovill. He made a slight nodding motion with his head as he reached for his shot and brought it to his lips, where it stayed, motionless, eyes on Scovill. Scovill remained seated squarely in his seat, his straw hat hanging off the toe of the brown Justin boot on his right leg, crossed evenly over his left. His eyes, one seemingly frozen in a permanent squint, remained on Ollie's. "Drink up, Morgan," Ollie said, a command, not a request. "I'm on duty," he said. Ollison rolled his eyes, put the shot down, and ran his paws over his balding head. He snorted, "Please give me a fucking break." Scovill shrugged. "Okay, I'm not thirsty then." "I'll drink it, Daddy." A dull voice in the corner of the room resonated. It sounded as if it sprang from vocal cords soaked in heavy phlegm. "Shut up, Craig," Olison said, leaning back in his heavy leather chair, resting his black-booted feet on his massive desk. "Morgan, we have been through too much not to be completely on board on this." "I am." Scovill glanced at the massive carved eagle hanging on the wall above Ollie's seat. "Well, let's drink on it then," Ollie said, exasperated. Scovill swooped his hat off the tip of his boot and placed it on his head as he leaned forward and stood, grasping the shot glass with his free hand and downing it. He moved so quickly, the hulking Craig was momentarily startled from his torpor. Olliston smiled and finished his shot off. "Glad we understand each other," he said. "Glad you're on board." Scovill nodded, placed the shot glass on the desk upside down, and turned on his heel. "Just so you understand that I'm handling this investigation, not you." Ollie raised his hands in mock surrender. "Of course." "Uh-huh," Scovill said, moving past Craig, eyes forward. He grasped the door to Ollison's office, looking outside at the bank next door and Mostak's general store across the street. "Just make sure our new college president understands our policy on interference in township matters," Ollison said. "His authority stops at the edge of campus, and even on campus, it is only as long as I say so." "Uh-huh," Scovill replied, slipping on his mirrored sunglasses, walking outside to his truck. It didn't take long to track down Cross College President Jack Lindstrom, true to the rumors which fly around Cross Township faster than Superman giving Wonder Woman the business. Lindstrom had taken a powerful, if unsurprising, liking to the barbecue over at the Tin Roof Rib Shack. Now in his second year at the head of the tiny college, the popular president preferred to meet outside of town with wealthy local farmers to secure grants for his campus revitalization plans over steaming plates of ribs and pork butt sandwiches made by Bart Robeson, owner and operator. Lindstrom's precious black Mercedes gleamed in the gravel parking area. Some of the kids on campus called him Mr. Mercedes when he drove by. Word was he'd be letting that go as soon as the college coughed up a lease he had negotiated on a Lexus SUV. Scovill opened the beat-up screen door of the shack, the sweet smell of mesquite and pork overwhelming his nose. He scanned the room, noting the faces of dozens of barbecue fiends dotting the room, stuffing their mouths with brisket, ribs, pulled pork sandwiches, and burnt ends served on butcher paper with cheap plastic tumblers of iced tea and soda. Beers would be great with the queue, but Ollie Olafson owned the Brown Betty Roadhouse down the road a bit and made sure that Robeson didn't even think of serving any competing booze. Scovill didn't have to look hard for his troublesome president. Lindstrom was holding court with his right-arm man, Dick Scheffler, at a table dead center in the shack's dining room. Dining room was a bit of a euphemism. It was mostly a collection of weather-beaten old picnic tables under a large tin lean-to. Just a few yards away were the three massive cast-iron smokers Bart Robeson had operated to the delight of locals for nigh on 25 years. Scovill caught the eye of Otis, one of Robeson's employees, bussing a table. Otis, his black skin gleaming with sweat, nodded and went about his business of clearing rib bones, sauce-stained paper towels, and drink tumblers. "Sheriff! Hey there!" Lindstrom said, his smile broadening as he wiped barbecue sauce from his goatee. Dick Scheffler waved, his half-smile betraying a wariness Scovill noted for future reference. "Dr. Lindstrom," Scovill said, sidling over to their table. "Mind?" "Please," Lindstrom said, gesturing for Scovill to sit. Scovill sat down, removing his hat and setting it upside down on the table, clear of a few dabs of spilled barbecued sauce and the sweat from an iced tea tumbler. "Sheriff, I believe you know Dick," Lindstrom said. Scheffler nodded and Scovill nodded back. "Dick. So, you going to have some of this?" Lindstrom said, picking up a pork rib. "My latest addiction." "No, just a social," he said. "Social call?" Lindstrom's brow furrowed. "What's more social than eating ribs?" "Bit of a long drive for a social call," a voice said from over Scoville's shoulder. "Especially if you don't know our president was going to be here, Morgan." "Shit," Scovill thought. Without looking over his shoulder, he smiled for a second and said, "Derek Kroll, who's minding the stacks over at the college library if you're out here stuffing your face?" Kroll slid onto the bench next to Scheffler, holding a plastic orange tray heaped with ribs. "Oh, I think everything will be all right over there for an hour or two." He reached for a red squeeze bottle. "Besides, boss doesn't mind." "You're going to put sauce on those ribs without even trying them?" Scovill said. "Roby sees that, he'll be insulted." "What he doesn't know won't kill him," Kroll said, upending the bottle and squeezing a copious amount of sauce on the ribs. "He's picking up more meat at the butcher." Scovill grunted. "Your call, Kroll, but if Roby hears about it, he'll ban you for a year." Lindstrom rolled up his shirt sleeves, revealing a shiny gold watch with a black strap on his right wrist. Scovill raised his eyebrow. "I sure like that watch, Dr. Lindstrom. Wonder where I might find one when my Timex here gives up the ghost." "Patek Philippe," Lindstrom said. "It's a very exclusive watch. They don't have those at the General Mercantile." Kroll sniggered, denuding a rib bone of its meat in 3 bites. "Well, that's okay," Scovill said. "The Timex looks like it's in good shape for now anyway." "Speaking of time," Scheffler said. "Quite right," Lindstrom said. "We should be getting back to the admin building." "I just got my food," Kroll said. "Hold up just a bit, would you, sir?" Scovill said. Lindstrom picked up a wet wipe packet, opened it, and began cleaning his hands, one finger at a time, the red coming off with only a light scrubbing motion. "Sure, Sheriff," he said. "Whatever you want." Scheffler sighed inwardly, his eyes on the table. Kroll continued to eat a sauce-drenched rib, sucking every fiber of meat from each bone. Otis passed by the table, sliding a tumbler of iced tea in front of the sheriff. Scovill nodded in gratitude. "Hot in here," he said. "This'll hit the spot." "What's on your mind, Sheriff?" Lindstrom said. "Well," he said, pausing to take a long swallow, "I'm just checking to make sure you're settling in all right." "Settling in? I've been here a year already." Lindstrom smiled, elbows on the table, leaning slightly forward. "Well, we haven't chatted much, really," Scovill said, smiling back. Scoville's smile had a chilling effect on the table. Men like Scovill rarely smiled due to mirth. "But this must be part of the famous Cross Township charm," Lindstrom said, very cordial. "Everyone in Cross has been so hospitable." "Especially the people who you're buying property from," Scovill said. Lindstrom nodded, his forehead shiny and scalp visible under his thinning hair. "Oh, yes, the Hansons. Very nice folks." "Very nice. Barely scratches the surface," Scovill said, his eyes on Lindstrom's. "Cross College bought the Hanson home for a song, or should I say the Cross College Foundation?" His gaze shifted to Scheffler, director of the foundation. "Well, I don't know. We acquired it for a song. That we acquired it for a song, I mean," Scheffler said, shifting in his seat and accidentally dipping his elbow in a blob of barbecue sauce. Lindstrom shot him a quick, sharp glance and handed him a wet white packet, nodding at his elbow. "You just got yourself in it, Dick. What I heard," Scovill said, sipping more from the tumbler of iced tea. Lindstrom observed a drop of condensation slip from the bottom of the tumbler and drop dead center on Scovill's badge. "Rumors. Town's full of them. Surely you don't put any stock in those." Scovill shrugged. "Don't have to. I can look up a deed at the county." "And what's your point?" "Just that the Hanson house was on the market for one day, then your foundation closed the sale the next." "So what?" Lindstrom said. "That house was adjacent to our science building, and we need the room for expansion. Incidentally, the house is coming down next month." Kroll's eyes darted between the two men, eating his ribs as if he were munching popcorn at a prize fight. "Well, Marvin Hanson never told anybody around here he was even thinking of selling. In fact, a local interest had made him an offer a few months ago, and he turned it down. Next thing we know, Marvin's car's in a ditch, he's got a broken skull, and will be on disability for life. His poor wife Laney has to sell, incidentally, to the Cross College Foundation, so she can be near him at the nursing home in Goss City." "Terrible tragedy," Lindstrom said. "Yes, sir, it was," Scovill said. "And still is. Just strange that all the pieces fell that way so fast." Lindstrom's smile unfurled. "From what I understand, a car getting run into a ditch is a proven method for accelerating commerce around here." Kroll pursed his lips in a silent whistle, a rib halfway to his mouth, his eyes on Scovill. Scovill nodded, face impassive, and fished a toothpick from his pocket. He slipped it into his mouth. "I am investigating what happened to Marvin." A silence dominated the table for a seemingly interminable 30 seconds, until a rib bone fell from Kroll's hands onto his tray. "Last one," he said, smirking. "That's good," Lindstrom said. "Investigate." "What do you think I'll find?" Lindstrom shrugged. "That Marvin had a stroke, that he was driving distracted. Maybe a wasp got in the car and he lost control trying to swat it. I hear that happens to people." "Occam's razor. You know that one, Dr. Lindstrom?" "I know plenty about razors, Sheriff." "Then maybe that's what it'll be. The simplest answer. I find that somebody ran him off the road." Scovill's gaze danced from Lindstrom to Kroll to Scheffler and back to Lindstrom. Scheffler ran a jittery hand through his hair, biting his lower lip. Kroll picked his teeth with a credit card. Lindstrom smiled. "Well, as I said, that seems to be the thing around here," he said. "Derek, didn't you tell me that that lovely young instructor, Kate something?" "Nathaniel," Kroll said, his expression wistful, as if imagining her nude in his bed. "The lovely, lovely Kate Nathaniel." Lindstrom glared at Kroll, then swiveled his head back to Scovill. "Nathaniel, yes. Didn't her husband die in a similar accident?" "Father-in-law, too," Kroll said. Way back when." "Oh, yes, terrible. Sheriff, it would seem that you might want to spend less time monitoring real estate deals and more time policing the state highways." Scovill eyed Lindstrom for a moment, rolling the toothpick from one side of his mouth to the other. He stood. "Thanks for the advice, President Lindstrom." Please, call me Jack Morgan," he said, also standing, extending his right hand. "It is Morgan, isn't it?" Scovill ignored the proffered handshake. "It's Sheriff. I'll be seeing you." Scoville's stomach growled the entire way back to Cross. The smell of Bart Robeson's barbecue is torture when you can't have any. The sun was down by the time his home appeared in the headlights. His wife was out of town visiting her old man at his farm outside Grand Island. He had cancer in his pancreas and wouldn't see Christmas. She had left right after Scovill went to work. Scovill smiled at the note she left on a casserole dish in the fridge. Heat at 250 for 40 minutes. with a hurriedly drawn, crude lace heart underneath. He replayed her last words to him that morning, the same every morning. "Don't get hurt." "Yes, ma'am," he said in the kitchen, that morning, and again that night, to her spirit. His mind cast back to her thick waist, mousy hair, and crooked smile as she threw feed to the chickens and cursed Ranger the rooster for laying down on the job. He supposed not many men would give her a second look these days, but she was a supermodel in the hayloft back in her day. Morgan Scovill had loved her in that hot, precious, dusty moment, and he loved her still. He had just preheated the oven when the phone rang. "So, what did they say?" Typical Ollie Olafson, no greeting, just business. "He thinks you wrecked Marvin," Scovill said, leaning against the kitchen sink. "Well, shit," Ollie said. "I had nothing to do with that." "You're pretty mad about that sale," Scovill said. "So? And you had a few wild turkeys that night, as I recall. So did Craig." "Never mind that," Ollie said. "So how are you going to build your case against Lindstrom?" Scovill paused, holding the old rotary phone receiver away from his ear as if it had offended him. "I thought we drank on this," Scovill said. "I wear the badge." "Lenny, you up?" Scovill bellowed into his telephone, drinking coffee from a chipped cup and looking at the chicken coop through his kitchen window. A sigh. "Yeah, Sheriff, I'm up." Scovill knew that his deputy, Lenny, was stroking his beard and fumbling through the cans of beer on his nightstand in search of a pack of cigarettes. The sound of tumbling of empty aluminum confirmed this. "Long night?" "Aren't they all, boss?" "Need you to do me a favor today if you can," Scovill said. Lenny knew that the phrase, "I need you to do me a favor," was Scovill speak for "here are your orders." "Sure, boss," Lenny said, flicking his bic. "What's the word?" "I need you to go over to the college today and make sure the fire system is working." "Huh?" "Just go test it, around 10 or so, for about 2 hours. "Oh," Lenny chuckled. "On and off for 2 hours? Admin building only?" "Yep, I suspect it isn't in good working order." "You got it," Lenny said. "If you get any static, call me, but keep your 6-shooter in your holster." Scovill hung up, put on his gun belt, and trudged out to feed the chickens before he got on with his law enforcement duties. The Heartland Care Home of Goth City was pleasant enough if you could forget that it was the last stop for the people who lived there. It was a place where the residents died slowly while their caregivers died just a little slower, toiling daily to make the last weeks of the residents' lives a tiny bit better. Scovill's Uncle Wilf died at Heartland. The man survived D-Day and 50-plus years of mind-numbing work on a hog farm, living every day for Schlitz o'clock, only to check out from an infected bedsore. Scovill had taken great pleasure in busting John D. Getty, the former administrator, for cooking the books at the home. He normally never would have bothered. Everybody had to make a living somewhere or another, and Medicare fraud wasn't really Scovill's bailiwick. But Getty had let Scovill's uncle rot away without proper wound care. That elicited a few calls to the state, then the feds, and Scovill got to slap the cuffs on Getty in the lobby to the surprise of the residents and the whispered approval of the staff. The new administrator was Yvonne Robinson, a curvy bleached blonde of 35 with a penchant for press-on nails and crowns formed by Aquanet and the ministrations of a fat plastic goody comb. "Yvonne," Scovill said, ignoring a smell of shit and antiseptic that dominated the lobby, which was decorated with a garish dollar store Jesus prints, plastic flowers, and wallpaper from the me decade. "Sheriff," she said, striding across the lobby to greet him, "to what do we owe the—" "Looking to talk to Marvin." Yvonne's round face crumpled into a mask of impatience. "Well, Sheriff, you know—" Her voice lowered, and she rested her long-nailed fingers lightly on his forearm. "Mr. Hanson can't speak, you know. Not really." "Yep," he said. "But his wife can. She's here. Saw Laney's Chrysler outside." "Well, of course, he's in Hall B, room 12, she said, pointing the way, her long fingernail nearly poking a nurse's assistant in the eye as she passed. "Sorry, Virginia." Scovill tipped his hat. "Thank you." "Anytime." Hey, how's John doing in El Reno?" Her predecessor was doing his stretch at the camp for white-collar offenders outside the federal prison in El Reno, Oklahoma. Yvonne smirked. "He's just fine, by all accounts. You know John D. He always finds a way to thrive." "When's he out?" Her eyes rolled up and to the right. "He has about another 14 months. "Good." Scovill nodded and turned to Hall B, tipping his hat to an ancient woman in a wheelchair who called out, "Hello, Marshal Dillon." "Miss Kitty, good day to you." Laney Hanson's gaze did not waver from her husband's bedside when Scovill knocked gently on the door jamb beside a whiteboard that read, Mr. Marvin Hansen's room in blue marker. Hansen was a bed baby, a resident unable to tend to any of his own body functions, and this was marked in a discreet code in small print below his name. Laney, it's Morgan Scovill. She held her husband's hand. His face was never quite right after the wreck. One of the eyes was out of kilter, and a nasty, jagged scar ran the length of his scalp. Hair never regrew very well on that side of his scalp. It just made an ugly trail from his cheek, over his forehead, and behind the right ear. "Come to pay your respects to Marvin?" she said, her eyes on Marvin's soulless eyes, staring at two differing fixed points. Scovill removed his hat and walked to the other side of the bed. "Hello, Marvin." His voice was a whisper. "He can hear you, so speak up," Laney said. She was a handsome woman of 60, though since Marvin's accident she'd stopped dyeing her hair, using makeup, or wearing anything other than simple denim blouses over denim work pants and boots. She looked like she was going out to tend her flower beds any minute now. Scoville's dad had often said that Laney Hansen was the prettiest girl in Cross in her day. That day was clearly behind her. "Laney," he said, clearing his throat. She continued to hold Marvin's hand and look at his tortured face. "Did those fellas in town, the ones who bought your house, did they ever, Laney's eyes remained on Marvin. "Did they what, Sheriff? Offer us peanuts for our house after we refused the first few offers? Did they run Marvin off the road and ruin our lives?" Her voice was steely, as if she'd practiced that very utterance for weeks. That's all I needed to know." Her eyes worked from Marvin's face, across his limp body, and up to Morgan Scovill's chest. "What's that?" She pointed at his star. Scovill looked at her finger, tracing it to her gaze at his right upper chest. My badge?" "When your daddy wore that badge, nothing like this would have ever happened. Your daddy protected us." His eyes fell away, back to her husband's face, never once meeting Morgan's. Marvin Hansen's left cheek twitched a moment. He murmured something unintelligible and fell back into his trance. Scovill wordlessly, quietly edged away from the bed to the door. "Laney, I'll make 'em pay," he said in the doorway, his voice faltering. "Get out, Morgan." "Sheriff, that guy Lindstrom's madder than Craig was that time you locked him in the shitter with that skunk," Lenny roared into the phone over the sound of the fire alarm. "He never did know it was you, but boy was he mad." "What's Lindstrom saying?" "His face is all red, and after about half an hour he walked up to me and he said he wanted me to tell you that this was Bush League bullshit and this was strike two." "Strike two? What was strike one?" he wondered aloud. "Huh? Sorry, hard to hear you over the bells," Lenny said. "Then he went in his office for a while, and then about 20 minutes ago he left with that Dick guy. You want me to stop?" Give it another half hour. Talk to you later." Scovill hung up his car phone as he sat in the parking lot of Heartland Care. He looked ahead a moment, through the windshield and past the shirtwaist-style building with its distinctive hub-and-spoke design. The phone rang again. "Scovill," he said, his eyes still on the building. "Morg, it's Ollie. Where are we in all this shit?" "I'm going to bury this guy." "Well, that's more like it," he laughed. "What's your next move?" "That's my call, Mr. Mayor," he said. "Anything else you need?" "Not a thing." "Then do me the courtesy of staying out of it, you and Craig, and let me deal with it. It may take some time." "Understood. It's your badge, just as long as our new friend understands who runs this town." Scovill grunted and hung up, turned the key, and pointed his truck at Cross Township. He eased it out of the parking lot with care, so as not to let the roar of his engine disturb the Heartland residents. A month later, the Indian summer had yielded to fall's invasion. This being Nebraska, fall was a deceptive flurry of leaves and cold breezes for a couple of weeks, before giving way to a wintry mix of ice and snow. "Hey, Sheriff," Derek Kroll said, smiling as used car dealers smile in the Cross Town Cafe downtown. "Kroll," he said, nodding as the librarian pulled up a chair. "Here we got a new guy on board. Trevathan brought him in to make up for some of that dead wood Lindstrom fired last semester." "Uh-huh," Scovill said, drinking his coffee and looking straight ahead. Kroll leaned in conspiratorially. "Ollie, thinks he could be useful in irritating Jackie Boy." Scovill harumphed, looking away. "Ollie thinks you ought to go by and introduce yourself. Maybe scare the shit out of him a little. Throw him off balance. But get a feel for him. See if he may be useful." Scovill nodded. He's in faculty housing. His name's Pilate, like in the Bible, John Pilate. Maybe you want to go pay him a visit. Get away from me. Krull smiled and wordlessly rose from his seat. Scovill put his coffee cup down, pondering what to say to his wife when she got home from Grand Island with her father's body. Her coming home, him heading for Griff Nathaniel's mortuary. It would be a few more hours yet, and he dreaded the empty house and the waiting. Jack Lindstrom and Dick Scheffler walked into the diner. Scovill stood, hands hitched on his belt. Lindstrom's ears were red from the cold, his eyes dead and boring into Scovill. "Sheriff," he said. "Cold out there?" "Gonna get colder," Scovill said. Scheffler, as was his way, hung back and smiled as if he were a spectator to two long-lost friends he did not know, chatting. "I hear it's going to be a long winter," Lindstrom said. "I hope we make it to spring." "We're not all going to make it," Scovill said. "We're not all supposed to." Lindstrom looked at Scovill a moment, as if restraining himself from responding the way he truly wished to. Instead, he said, "If you'll excuse me, I have to meet with some community leaders about my cross-college expansion campaign. We're growing every day, you know. Going to turn this place around." "Buy any new houses lately?" Lindstrom ignored the crack and walked away, he and Scheffler converging on a table of city fathers, making jokes about the cold and shaking hands. Scovill shrugged into his down jacket, dropped $1 on the counter, and walked out to his truck. He would make a stop at faculty housing before he went home to wait for his grieving wife. That was Badge, a short story from Pilate 7, a new book of short stories about the John Pilate Mystery series, and I hope you will check it out at pilatescross.com or at your favorite online book retailer, including Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Kobo, Apple iBookstore, etc., etc. I'm J. Alexander Greenwood. I appreciate you listening. Thank you so much, and I'll talk to you next time.
From regular expenses to occasional splurges, there's a lot to buy. Why not get cash back every time you spend? With the PenFed Power Cash Rewards Card, you get cash back on every purchase. That's everywhere, every time you use it. You can even earn a $100 statement credit when you spend $1,500 in the first 90 days. Visit PenFed.org/PowerCash to apply. To receive any advertised product, you must become a member of PenFed, insured by NCUA. A little flexibility can go a long way. By refinancing your new or used auto loan with PenFed, you can lower your monthly payments for more flexibility in your budget. You can even schedule your first payment for up to 60 days from the date of your refinance. Calculate how much you could save at PenFed.org/auto-refi or call 1-800-247-5626 to apply. Membership is open to everyone. To receive any advertised product, you must become a member of PenFed, insured by NCUA.